if we're using the computer metaphor, money is a database of who owes what favors or who owns what purchasing power, however you want to call it. Bitcoin is the database that can only be updated by people that actually do the work, whereas fiat and shitcoins are not. Now, there's a more sophisticated argument about why proof-of-work shitcoins don't work. It essentially boils down to centralization versus decentralization. It's not trust minimized. Like we can spin up Bitcoin 2.0 right now and copy the rules exactly, but we will not have attained. And I wrote a lot about this in the Number Zero on Bitcoin, but things like path dependence, first mover advantage, multi-sided network effects. There's a reason why we can't just recreate decentralization in a lab, right? There's this idiosyncratic sequence of events that has to transpire to become decentralized over time. Like you could even say, well, Bitcoin starts out as centralized in the mind of Satoshi, and then it goes on and on and on. When it survives something like the block size wars of 2017, like that's a very credible event that reinforces or even strengthens the decentralization of Bitcoin. And so there's a lot of external things going on in the world that cement decentralization in a way that you can't just do abstractly in a lab, basically.
It requires network effects, right? It requires...
and path dependence, right? It's like, this thing was first mover, this thing had network effects, and money is like a winner take all. So it's, there's a reason we only have one gold.
Yeah.
Same basic economic principles. We're only going to have one digital gold, and Bitcoin has already won that race.
Yeah. The philosopher Nick Land has this idea, hyperstition, where speculative ideas about the future can bring the future into the present, can realize. And so you have a few maniacs at Bitcoin's inception that are already willing to see it as money. And so they bootstrap it into the future. They bring the future into the present. If you don't have that, you don't get that path dependence that brings us to the present moment where now it's big enough to go beyond a handful of maniacs, right? And to survive.
It's another interesting feedback loop between action and abstraction. Kind of going the other direction, right? Like, and inflation's another good example of that. Like if you think the currency is going to be depreciated 10% next year, well, then you're going to sell your currency to buy something that's not. And that's actually creating the inflation that you anticipated. Yeah. So inflation is a psychological phenomenon. And I guess monetization is as well, right? Yeah. So, and we talked yesterday about persuasive versus coercive power, but I think, what makes Bitcoin... Money is basically always persuasive power. It's like someone's only going to accept money in exchange for goods and services if they're persuaded to believe that money will hold its value into the future or increase in value. But when it can be taken by force, then it can be acquired non-persuasively or coercively. And that's the problem we're trying to solve for. It's like, how do you create a money that is not vulnerable or incentivizing to coercion, basically?
Yeah, and I'd say on money as persuasive, it's persuasive among the people who are using it for any specific transaction. Yeah. But it's kind of coercive on, we settle on the best money, and you can't just say, I'm going to use this other thing as money. And so you can't have an abstract power hierarchy that persuades you to use something that's not good money as good money. Yeah. You are coerced by the laws of nature into settling upon something that has the characteristics of hard money. That's
why I'd have a semantic quibble, because I would say coercion is reserved for me, human on human. I guess animals things, too, but any organism with a teleological aim can coerce, basically.
Fair enough.
I don't know. Animals, do they coerce you, or are they just? I don't know. That's a whole nother can of worms. But like, when game theory persuades you to adopt Bitcoin to preserve your purchasing power, right, I call that persuasion. Right? You could call it self-preservation, I guess, is another way to look at it. But coercion, I would say, is more like legal tender laws. You will pay your taxes in this money, or else we're coming after you. So Bitcoin is like something that is just more characterized by persuasive power rather than coercive power.
I can see that distinction, yeah.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, click here to find more just like it, and here to find our most recent episode. Also, make sure to like this video to help shine light on the corruption of money. And be sure to subscribe to this channel to stay connected.